Hello and welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. Chats on leadership, life and lessons learned, often the hard way. Now this week, Bridge and I are chatting about shedding. No, not tears. Well, maybe. But old skins. Leadership ones and very possibly life ones too. We're talking about those in-between moments. You've changed, but has everything else caught up? What about those moments when what used to work just didn't fit anymore? When the new way isn't fully formed yet? And when you're not quite who you were, but not yet who you're becoming? So grab a cuppa, get comfy, and come explore the awkward, honest, and often liberating process of molting in being between skins. This has got to be one of the most random topics we have come across yet. Bridge.
Don't blame me. This was your idea.
I know. I wasn't blaming you as I said it, but just now having done it and then getting ready for it, I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to talk about? I have some ideas, but I just think it's well, I'll tell you how my brain came upon it. This whole business about trying to, step ourselves up a gear to make sure that we're doing things that are thematic and trying to keep them together, that this is just another element of what change is like. And I was thrown back to, in fact, our second episode with Steve White, when we were talking about were we different through the ages, and of course he was suggesting that not much for himself, and I'm like, oh my God, well, I'm really glad that you've managed to sort of like have it nailed.
Right from the beginning.
Right from the beginning. Because I can clearly identify a whole range of places where I am not. I mean, I guess we're at the essence of being who we've always been. But there's got to be new stuff that gets added in as well as stuff taken away. And that's where I sort of like wanted to go to with it.
Yeah, because otherwise how boring would it be if we were the same as we were, exactly the same as we were when we were in our 20s or in our 30s or even in our 40s, because we're so old now. And I think there's an element, isn't there, of, we've talked about this sort of thing about wisdom and experience, and as we grow, I think that there's a lot of people who, as they get older, kind of finally start to feel maybe they fit into their skins a bit better than they did when they were 20. And I certainly have felt that way, that sort of embracing the crone in a way, but also I kind of think there's a little bit of, well, actually you've referred to this poem before. When I'm old, I shall wear purple, and I love that poem. I remember hearing it when I was probably about 14 at school. I'm thinking, that sounds like that's how I want to be when I grow up. Yeah, that's what I want to. I just want to, not give a fuck anymore. And obviously, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't give a fuck, because obviously we do, and we care. Most people I know in their leadership journey, they care very deeply. But actually, starting to just let go of some of the worries that have held us back. Maybe I definitely worry less about what people think than I did when I was in my 20s and 30s. And I also kind of use my cronedom as an excuse as I grin manically in my chaos pixie way at people and just go, I much prefer to ask for forgiveness than permission. And I've kind of really grown into that as well, that sometimes I like to just move forward. Or if I get frustrated by bureaucracy, sometimes to try and find solutions, I will, do it and then go, soz, not soz really. And I also worry a lot less about, whether I'm popular. I think I definitely wanted to be the sort of loved leader when I was younger, and I don't worry about that so much. There's still lots of things that I know that I need to grow into, but I think that element of freedom that comes from being a bit older and not having to be so apologetic or worry whether or not you've got the experience. I think I've come to that a little bit. So I've shed that estrogen skin because I don't have any anymore.
I really couldn't decide when I was thinking about how I was going to try to articulate my level of shedding, if that's the way that we're describing it. There's this thing that I've come across from a lady called Herminia Ibarra. She's written the book Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, and she talks about separation, liminality and reintegration. So that I do at some point want to say, well, maybe now that I'm here I should say that first, because when you're talking about the things that you were more prone to be like when you were younger and versus what it's like now that you are older, that leaves me, especially with what she said about, does it just come as a matter of age or the environments and the situations that we find ourselves in? So that's one. And because what she's saying is that when you're separating from the sort of like the way that you know yourself, even when we're talking about indoctrination or, you know, something really quite extreme, but the separation that she talks at its most extreme is when you're taken away from everything and everyone that you've known previously, and you're deprived the grounding of your old identity, is the way that she describes it. I'm like, blimey, that all sounds a little bit drastic. But then she gives a more realistic example that I could get my head round about that moment of that young adult when they've left home, left school and gone to college. And I saw it with people that I'd known at school who might have been, you know, the person that nobody really took much notice of or whatever it might be, and they'd absolutely reformed themselves as a result of getting into a different environment. And, you know, and people can often do some of that when they move jobs. So I got all of that. And that's going to bring me on to the personal element to this as well. The liminality, this what she refers to as the liminal interludes. I was like, well, that sounds very nice. But what she's saying there is about the bravery of experimenting and trying stuff and meeting new people or different people so that you learn more about you through skills, through knowledge, through relationships, whatever it might be. And we don't have all of those forever, or we may well find ourselves in in an opportunity for a liminal interlude, but decide that what you see is what you get, and I'm just going to stay as I always have been. And of course that then affects everything that's happening around you, and I could get my head around that as well, because as a result of that, when she then comes on to reintegration, that is about habit discontinuity. And again, there's that having to like grizz it out, the discomfort of learning something new and getting into the practice of a new habit. And sometimes, you know, I think we've said in other episodes when we said about people just retreat back to their comfort zone because the reintegration piece or the final bit of the shedding is just too uncomfortable, so they don't do it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I haven't thought about it in that way. I get the sort of you're recreating yourself. It's all a bit existential, isn't it? But the recreating of yourself in a completely new environment, and there's a freedom with that, because, you know, even if you maybe feel that you've cocked up or are not content with how you maybe performed in a certain circumstance, when you go into a new place, you get this freedom to rewrite how you're going to be. And that can be terrifying or it can be exciting depending on how you like risk or engage with risk. One's not better than the other, I hasten to add. But yeah, and that's a really good example, is the university thing, because I think that I did, you know, I think a lot of us do that, at least on some form of spectrum, to recreate ourselves with a new set of friends, a new set of circumstances. The liminal element, again, you're absolutely right. It's not just about getting older, getting more experience. It's all to do with the different situations that you're in and the different, I guess, experiences rather than experience, so that you get all of these different, you know, one leader may deal with, you know, really extreme change management and another won't. And as a result of that, you will develop or not skills that align with the need for those particular experiences. So, but then, yeah, I hadn't really got to that third stage of the, you know, that final shed of the sort of total incorporating all of those things and stepping into the space that you want to be in, and whether or
Yeah.
not you then just go back and go, actually, no, I don't, I'm still comfortable being this Bridget rather than that Bridget.
And what she's saying in the book, and this, I was like, oh, okay, right, I'm really beginning to see this now, because of course what she's saying is that, that shedding or evolving your identity, or however we want to describe it, isn't necessarily like existential or deep introspection. There's elements of that, because there's got to be that level of reflection of like, where am I now, who am I now, what am I becoming. But she's very much into this experimentation with new behaviours and new roles, basically, that we can actually take on. And so she calls it outsight rather than insight, which I liked. And what she's saying with the way that she's describing it is that she's challenging the idea of staying authentic, because what happens is that our authenticity might get stuck at the reintegration stage if we are deciding to stick with our old narrative, our old way of being. So what then you've got going on, and I'm trying to think of examples where this might have happened to me, where you are in an old narrative of yourself. Well, the easiest example is, I'm not good enough. I'm always a bit second best. I never do as well as I should do, blah, 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 whatever the nattering shite hawk on my shoulder is actually saying to me a lot of the time, or used to. And yet I want to convey that actually I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm really good at what I do, and everything else besides. But of course it has become inauthentic, or it could have become inauthentic, because I'm so busy trying to strive to be that thing, that new role, that new behaviour, but it isn't actually sitting well in me, because the storyline I've actually got is still something entirely different.
Yeah.
So that to me is what makes reintegration feel so bloody uncomfortable, because you're not, for whatever reason, you're not ready to take on the full new narrative.
Isn't that an interesting concept though? Because we've talked a lot about authenticity, and authenticity is that buzzword that, oh, you've got to be an authentic leader, you've got to be an authentic leader. But hanging on to your authenticity can hold you back, which I'd never looked at in that way, which is fascinating. That I guess it's really an example of anything can be, or not anything, but so many things can be too much of a good thing. So, too much authenticity, or being obsessed with, or holding on very tightly to authenticity, kind of prevents you from finding a new authenticity, or opening up a space, an opportunity for you to grow into a butterfly, because you're holding on to being a caterpillar. Not that you're a caterpillar, Bobby. You were definitely a butterfly.
Definitely a butterfly. Some days more like a dirty little moth, but yes,
Ew.
maybe some days. No, see, there I go again. No, I am a butterfly. But the coaching bit, and what I've learnt, both in my own development and then what I'm bringing to others now, is, say that you are attempting to shed a skin. A coach might be somebody who helps you make the first incision. You may well feel sort of like almost internally that there's something else wanting to try to get out, but you are still stuck in this narrative, which continues to be the self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'll say a little bit more about this in terms of the book I was reading. But all the things that I had to learn and identify about self, which was part and parcel of what that identity was, which was, whilst on the outside I seemed very amiable, very affable, I was quite grisly with people, I was quite resentful, I almost sort of like kept them a little bit at a distance because I didn't really trust them. And I was also incredibly controlling. Whilst I'll spend most of my life saying I really don't want to be in charge, I do want to be in fucking charge. It's time to start embracing the fact that in every situation I have to be in charge, and then I'm happy. So that's not quite the case, because the learning I've had to do, the shedding of the skin, is rather than wanting to be in that place where it's me against the world and I have to be in control of everything, it's me understanding the role I play in the world the role I play amongst everybody else. And that's the real shift for me. And some days I get that right and I'm very integrated with everybody else, and then other times I'm back to shouting about being in charge. So the evolution is forever. What the hell was I trying to say with all of this? You know, somebody had to come and stick a spoke in the wheel for me, you know, that first incision, which was very much about your self-fulfilling prophecy, where you think that you're not going to be accepted. You are railing against stuff because, you know, it becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy because of the way that you're actually behaving. So that coaching element gets you into the liminal interlude by giving you a load of practices which are safe to go and practice.
Do you think that then that the coach also can play a big part in that final shed as well, if you're struggling with the final piece? So at the beginning, doing that first cut that allows whatever is going to come out to start to come out, and to give you the space to change, metamorphosize, or shed. But then if you're struggling, and I suspect that most of us do struggle with that final stage, I think that it is hard to step away, you know, to be the butterfly, to get rid of some of the limiting beliefs and some of the old narrative, that especially if you've had that narrative for a very long time or a huge part of your life, or if you're in a work environment that there's a really great word that popped into my head now, I can't remember what it is, but that perpetuates, that's the word, perpetuates some of your old narrative, that a coach then also can be that catalyst for that final stage, to do the alchemy, I guess, to do the final change, so that where you move from lead into gold. I wonder.
So, yes, and just a little hark back to
nice one.
Another episode. As a coach, you are attempting to do is not be a crutch. They've got to be there for every stage. So definitely the incision piece, because often people are coming and they'll be in this narrative going, I'm stuck. This keeps happening. I don't want to be like this anymore. This is what keeps happening in jobs, etc., etc. And you know, it's well catalogued when we've been talking on the episodes that I managed to get myself out of 2 jobs, mainly from not changing, but realising that something was up with how I was behaving in work, and it couldn't keep being like that because, one, I was finding it utterly exhausting and something was off. And so the coach comes along with that first incision about, this is what life currently looks like for you and here's a possibility, this is what you could step into. So then they become like the accountability buddy, because they're then there giving you ideas and suggestions for the practices and the behaviours that you can be hanging out in. So it may well be something very actionable, and we talk about that and the somatic practices that I might give people, but equally the self-reflection about having people stopping and pausing and thinking about when they've stepped back into the old skin and tried to sew up the incision, and also when they've managed to almost start to come out to show that they are really stepping into the possibility that's been given. And then I then firmly believe that the alchemy, if that's the word that we're going to use, has to become the person's responsibility for themselves. A coach can do so much, and then the person has to make a decision as to whether they are going to, as we said, you know, lose and resign particular habits and take on the new ones, because the possibility is beginning to seeds of growth. You know, it's become less uncomfortable. It's still not feeling like it quite fits, but it's the commitment that you want to keep trying it so that it does become fittable, and that's not even a word.
Embodied.
Embodied. Why did I? Of course I should use the word embodied. What the hell is the matter with me today? but yeah, I think that the coach shows the path, but the person has to do the work.
Yeah. And to prove that I have done some homework for this episode, have you heard about John Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership?
I think I have, but I wouldn't be able to name them off. I've heard John Maxwell, but no, let's go for it.
So, and this is on a slightly different tack from this complete transformation, I guess, but effectively, Maxwell, and he's written loads and loads of leadership books. We'll stick some of them in the resources. But I think he's most sort of famous for talking about how you develop as a leader. So, level one is called position, where your leadership is based on a title or a formal authority. And you're kind of limited in your influence. Essentially, you're a leader because someone said you are. Then you can, if you do some work and you do your development, grow into your space, you get to level two, which is permission, which is leadership based on relationships. So you earn trust, respect, you make connections, lots of things that we've talked about that are important in leadership. And people start to follow you because they want to, not just because you got the title. And in this stage, you're working on your emotional intelligence, your empathy, and your ability to inspire. Then level three is production. I can see he's got a theme going with all the P's. Leadership based on results. Influence is reinforced through your ability to drive outcomes, deliver results. You get credibility. And this is where your sort of experience comes in as a leader. And then level four, people development. See what he's done there? He had to put the other P in. Leadership based on reproduction, and not in any way the sexy kind, unfortunately. Although, actually, no, not unfortunately, because that'd be wrong. But this is about how you multiply your impact. And this is where you're developing others, you're mentoring teams, you're building future leaders. And then finally, you get to the highest level pinnacle, which is leadership based on respect, and it's about legacy. So it's where you're not being just followed for your results or the relationships, but who you are and what you represent. So it's all about your values, how you've shaped culture, how your influence goes beyond just the organization, but it's all about culture and values for future generations. And I kind of like that. And while it's not really just about personal development, but it is kind of a roadmap for many people of how you'd like to be seen as a leader. And I think most people focus on two, which is that you're followed because people respect you, because they want to follow you. But actually, in terms of a truly great leader, is someone who creates a culture of leadership around them and has an impact on the future, not just on the team that they currently have. So I quite like that.
I like it. So say them again. So you start with position.
So it is position, permission,
Yeah.
production, people development, and then pinnacle.
Pinnacle. I like that. I'm just trying to think about how that aligns with the, not necessarily a shedding of skin, but we're back to those things that I was talking about with the, well, what are the interludes? What are the new behaviours and habits that you've got to take in, moving from reliance on a job title, because that's basically what position is saying, to reaching a pinnacle. And I don't mean this in any glib way, but I have to say, in reflecting on doing this episode, I don't think I've fully stepped in to what I want to be like as a leader until I've become an independent consultant.
I think sometimes really having some kind of wider impact, bigger impact than an organization, if you're not actually in an organization.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And obviously, in theory, a CEO could be at a pinnacle sort of stage of leadership if they really do make significant changes to the organization in terms of leadership. But I do think it's not easier, because I think it's very rare for most leaders to get to that pinnacle stage. I suspect that most leaders get to maybe stage 3, they've got their relationships sorted, their influence, and then they're delivering, and everyone respects them for the fact that they are delivering while not being a see you next Tuesday. But to then go beyond that to actually be influencing and developing people, I think many leaders don't get the opportunity or the space to do that. when they're already focusing on just making sure that their teams are good and that they're delivering. And then even if you are a great team developer, personal developer, I think then to make that final step to have sort of legacy, I don't think many leaders get to do that. And that's why you then see these sort of leaders who are up on a pedestal of like, this was an example of a great leader. And that's not to say that that's because people are bad or good, but I think that often circumstances impact that as well. And so, as you say, for many people, you're not going to be able to do legacy stuff until you step outside an organization, which is what you've done. So now, no pressure, Bobby.
No,
But you're already doing it. You're already doing it.
well, and God, it doesn't need to be to number 5, does it? Just the fact of feeling like there's more impact because I get the chance to develop other people, with what I'm now doing, which is what I've always loved. And that was very much the step change for me when I stopped worrying so much about what was happening. What am I trying to say here? I think that, when you look at going up the levels, I do really feel for leaders, because with all of the shizzle that's going on around them from the environments that they are actually in, to be taking that beat, to be thinking about their own development and to be reflective and to be thinking about how they're actually operating and whether there is a little incision that needs to be made in the skin for better behaviours, better habits for themselves, which will impact better on others. A number of organisations I work with who just say that it's too busy reacting, and I get it. When I'm glibly saying, what would it be like to just take a beat, to really see what the skin of this organisation or yourself or your team is actually doing for you. What could be different if you just gave yourself the opportunity to do exactly that? If we go all the way back to what I was saying about that authenticity plus old narrative, if you are in a narrative of we've got too much to do, we're too busy, we're just busy reacting, nothing changes. It doesn't matter if there may well be something happening over there, because you're sticking with the same old story.
I think also there's an element, though, of that I think that the organizations can either make this easier or harder, right? I do think that there is sometimes a mistake in terms of leadership actually is a role in itself. And there are leadership tasks that take time and need resources in terms of energy, sometimes financial, but definitely time. And in so many organizations that I have worked with, I've seen that the leader is given a whole person, if not two people's tasks to do in terms of operational delivery, blah, blah, blah. And so there is absolutely no space for the leadership tasks and roles. So then it becomes one of those things of, what do you sacrifice? What do you prioritize? How do you prioritize? And if you start to prioritize some of the leadership elements, but then that means that you're not delivering as well because there just isn't the space. And so I do think that organizations, if they want to have good leaders, they need to enable them and to empower them to be able to have at least some time to be able to do all of those things that are not, like don't tick off the KPIs or whatever it is. So I'll give you an example, because my boss today has been talking about that all of the team leaders, we need to be doing bi-monthly performance management leadership conversations with our team. And that's great. It's a great thing, and he has said that our performance will be assessed against how we are doing that, which is great, because now that gives everyone the incentive, to know that's part of my performance. But I'm going to be really interested to see that in terms of the organizational environment, whether that is going to be in fact possible with a team that's already burning, or if not burnt out, to turn around and say, okay, I know that you've got, you're working 15 hours a day, but I'd also like to have an hour's chat with you in, out of hours, wherever it is, at 7 o'clock in the morning or at 8 o'clock at night when we finish doing whatever it is we do. So I do think that the environment can play a big part, and it can be very difficult when you are already overwhelmed to be able to see that space, to be able to find the space to be able to do it in, even if it's an innovative way. I think that sometimes that you have to do innovative ways of doing these extra, it's not an extra task, it's part of your role, but to do what people view as an extra task on top of all the other stuff. So yeah, I think that the organizations that do it best recognize that leadership tasks actually take time and can't just be like an additional little bonus thing that you do if you happen to have a few moments spare.
Yeah. And so interesting, because whilst that whole element that I've talked about, there was a couple of others, because Herminia Ibarra talking about rigid authenticity, but what we're trying to shed ourselves into is adaptability and experimenting with stuff. So that was one. So that almost plays out your performance about what can we experiment with, because where you actually want to get to is not some bloody tick box exercise that's been added on, and that whole element about the maturity of an organisation, and especially the type of organisation that you're working for and the type of environment that you are actually in. There is the penchant to rush through it, because let's just not have it touch the sides, because there's so much else that we're actually trying to do. So what covers that is, there's a lady called Jennifer Garvey Berger, and she talks about how leaders get better as they grow with complexity. Well, you're a leader working in a shit ton of complexity at the moment in the type of environment that you're actually in. And so what the leadership shedding bit for that almost is not binary thinking. So if you think about a performance management system, which is like ticking things off and how's this, and as you say, let's look at the KPIs, because with KPIs there can always be that it's right or wrong, good, bad, positive, negative, binary thinking. Whereas for a performance conversation for you to all be in, what you're looking at is, well, cognitive complexity, humility, and probably multiple truth holding. It's this and it's that. It's this grey area. What can we actually do about this? And so it becomes much more of that reflective conversation to establish what performance really is.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because one of the things that I really don't like in terms of these ideas of performance management is that most people, when they're talking about performance management, are talking about dealing with poor performance. So people look at it as if it's like, right, I have to have this conversation with someone to tell them that they're not doing a good job. But we don't really think of it in terms of, actually, why are we just, as you say, having a conversation about how do you think you're doing? How are you coping? What are you struggling with? How can I help? What can we look at to support you? How's the workload? Have you, particularly in our circumstances, have there been any traumatic events in the last 2 weeks that you need to speak to someone about? For me as a leader, I really don't look at it in terms of, oh, what can I pick holes in with you today because you haven't delivered? I want it to be about, what are your aspirations, particularly in the humanitarian context. Everyone is terrified about losing their jobs at the moment because all the funding crisis. And so what are you worried about? Are you, is this something that's playing on your mind? Have you got any other ambitions? What courses can we get you on? What training can we work with? Where are you finding that maybe you don't feel that you're prepared enough? And how can we develop that element of you? Could you be a mentor to someone else because you are finding this bit really, really interesting and you want to get involved in it? Or, which bits are you hating? And which bits are you feeling your skill set's not aligned with? And I'd rather have those conversations than so we have noticed that you haven't been doing so well on this. I just think they're pointless.
And the interesting thing with the way that you're actually describing it is getting everybody into the liminal space. What can they experiment with? What can they be doing differently? What can they train for? Who is it that they're actually working with? What does their self-care look like? Blah, blah, blah. Which in actual fact, can garner different performance. I mean, if we go back to William Bridges as well, that we were talking about last week with the transitions model that he talks about in Change, that what you're describing as well is the neutral zone that he talks about, again, that middle space, because you cannot have performance certainty in the environment that you're working in. And you're not the only organisation like that. But when you're in that rigid element about this is what it's got to look like, you know, that is a leadership style. And of course, there are places where that is. But if you want to do the leadership shedding as to what come next, that is about ambiguity, reflection and recalibration. And if you've got all of that stuff that's going on alongside it, that's absolutely the conversation to be in. But what tends to happen, of course, in organisations, and I mean, I know he's talking specifically about change programmes, but you are in a change situation if there's restructuring and everything else going on, that people want to rush through it. We'll just take a red pen and we'll go slice like this and it'll all be fine. You know, of course, that's not when there's people involved in all of that. But equally, you could do that as a team first to decide what the baseline actually looks like before you have any individual ones. And then everyone sees that there's a purpose to it. It's not just doing it because you've been told you've got to do it and we just need to get it done because everyone wants to go home. You know, there can be something that comes out of it.
Yeah, I like that idea as well. So I am absolutely looking at trying to work out now some ways to have those conversations, but that there's a purpose to them and that they're helpful. I don't see the point of ticking the box and going, yeah, okay, I've done my chat with you, you're doing fine, awesome, well done, off you go. Or, oh, yeah, you're not doing what I was anticipating you're doing. But actually, even if they are, that's the situation, then really the conversation is why, you know, what's going on that means that you're approaching this in a way that I wasn't expecting. And actually often, just because someone's approaching something in a different way doesn't mean it's a bad thing. You know, once people start to say, well, the reason is because I was coming in at this angle and this wasn't working. And so actually what I've had to do is rethink it completely. And I know that, you know, we were hoping that we'd be at this stage by then, but these things have come up and they've interfered with how we were hoping things would be done. And I was going to put together some resources because I think that certainly in this organization, they're not used to having those type of performance management conversations. They're very much a tick box thing. Here are the things that you were supposed to achieve in this period. But as you said, it's binary. You either have or have not achieved them. Halas, that's it. And you get your performance marked on that. And for me, it's been probably one of the most frustrating things that I've found about working with the United Nations was that actually performance management is not done very well. So I shall be looking through a lot of our old resources and putting things together, particularly the one where we had difficult conversations, and just putting them and saying, hey, you know, if you're new to this, particularly because I think there are a lot of people who are new to it, especially because normally the UN would have a once a year or a twice a year, and we've had a rant about that in a very, very early episode. That, you know, that would be the conversation. You'd go 6 months and suddenly be told, yeah, you're shit, or hey, no, awesome, well done, carry on. So this having to have them twice a month, so every 2 weeks, it's going to be a real shock for people, and they'll be like, I don't fucking know what I'm supposed to say to people in this. So I just would like people to feel more comfortable just having a conversation about hopes and aspirations and challenges and support needs and training or capacity development that you can have if you're having a regular conversation, rather than hey, I left it 6 months and actually we need to do a massive course correction.
And the interesting thing is that twice a month thing, you know, if we're going to bring it all the way back round to the title of this episode, is that's like an enforced skin shedding for some people potentially, whereas this drumbeat of having conversations about what's working for me, you know, in terms of my behaviours or the actions that I'm taking or whatever it might be, people can begin to see that actually the skin's fine for the time being, or you need a little incision because this bit needs to change, or whatever it might be. It doesn't need to be, you know, we started off by talking about a whole shedding, and we also talked about butterflies, but butterflies go from being a caterpillar to a chrysalis and then a butterfly, and then they die. Whereas I think that, you know, sometimes whilst we're talking about skin shedding, it's always like, I wonder if we should have changed the title to it, because it's seasonal. You know, there's a set of skills and a set of habits that work very, very nicely in this given situation. And I think I've used the stuff before about overplayed strengths, because it's not quite working in the way that it used to, and it needs tweaking, or it needs the volume turned down and the volume turned up somewhere else. And that's what these performance conversations are like, and that's what it's like in leadership, to go, this isn't working here, what do I need to do differently? Yeah. And if I think all the way back to, you know, those levels that you're talking about, when I was thumping about because of my position versus bollocks to the position, and the fact that I may well be sitting on a senior leadership team, but I'm going to get in amidst it and understand people. So people might think that the leadership behaviours that I was conveying weren't very leader-like if I'm stood chatting with a group of staff, or the huge laugh I used to have with my teams that was incredibly irreverent. They'd probably say irrelevant as well, but irreverent was the word I was looking for. But I don't care. There comes a point in time that my informality sometimes was not well placed, but for the most time has actually got me some great teams to work with. And if we go all the way back to what we were saying at the beginning about age, I think that's where age helps, that you can begin to start realising that your way of being is a little bit off beam, and then you can choose whether to do something about it or carry on wearing purple, spitting in the street and eating butter.
Nothing wrong with butter, with bread and Marmite.
Absolutely.
And so, and bread and honey, and oh God, you made me hungry now.
Bread and anything.
Bread and butter, just bread and butter.
My favourite.
Okay, so we are at the end, I think, my lovely.
We are.
And we managed to get an episode out of your random brain thing coming out of your head.
Yes, the random brain thing coming out of my head, that's another really beautiful visual that you've left us with today. Probably better than a shedding skin. Anyway, so I have a closing quote, which goes as simply as this. Maybe you are not broken. Maybe you are just shedding a little. And maybe you are growing into something new.
Beautiful. I love that.
Just nice to finish with. Right, I'm off to get some bread.
Yes. See you next week, my lovely.
Speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. As ever, all the resources we mentioned today are on our website and Spotify page. Take a moment, dig in, and let it all land in your own time. Next week, we're moving from skin to sensation as we explore what happens when leadership travels below the neck. We'll be diving into somatic intelligence, or maybe we should call it body wisdom. How the body holds your leadership patterns, how to listen to what your gut is really telling you, and what shifts when we stop leading with our heads alone. We'll be talking culture, cognition, and the power of presence, plus tools and wisdom from the brilliant minds at the Strozzi Institute. So join us next week for Being Below the Neck.